Welcome into episode 195. Be sure you're following us on Twitter at Bailey J Adams 22, at by CA Simmons, at Night Sports Now, and at Pegasus Podcast. UCF one uniform of the year, Uniswag uniform of the year, the space uniforms. We did it. I think we can take a lot of credit for it. We said it on the podcast last week like 5 times. Go vote, and you did. So good job.
I'm assigning this directly to the Pegasus Podcast listeners. Definitely not the many other UCF fans who were deeply committed to getting this over the edge. And also, the thing about the Uniswag Awards is it's fan vote, and that's why UCF. Well, it is and it isn't, because Uniswag determines who's up for the nominations in the first place. Like, they decide who's nominated for Uniform of the Year, and then fans get to vote on it. And that's why UCF's always in the mix, because they have a very online fan base. But Uniswag is a very large account that a lot of people vote in, and you've got to win over some of the casuals to be able to take that award home, because Texas Tech in particular, and I forget there was another school who their fans were doing the same spamming type stuff UCF was. So huge accomplishment, well earned. 3 Uniform of the Years in 6 years for UCF. I believe they're the only repeat winner, period, and they've won it 3 times.
That
Uniform
qualifies
dynasty.
as a dynasty. Yeah,
that is a dynasty.
That qualifies as a dynasty.
But can I honestly, like, on a sort of serious note, just say for a second that they started the space game in 2017. They've done a unique uniform every single year. I can't overstate how difficult it is and how not easy of a thing it is to design a uniform every single year. There's a reason the vast majority of programs would never screw with something like that, of having to come up with a new uniform every year. And for UCF to not only do that, but they're literally all awesome and unique and different, and no two are alike, is, I don't think they get half as much credit as they should for how incredible that is. And seriously, like, shouts to them. And I know that that award means a lot to them. It means a lot to the equipment folks, and like, so beyond well deserved.
I was talking to somebody about that last week at the Combine. I was like, I think we were watching Javon's highlights or something like that. And that game popped up, and somebody said something about the uniforms, or I said something about the uniforms. And I'm like, every year, like, I was like, I really don't know what they could do this year. And I was like, well, I say that every year. And they always manage to do something to top the previous year. So I don't know. I'll keep saying it because my brain can't come up with some of these things, but then something comes out and I was like, why didn't I ever think of that? But
I know. I have hunches for this year, but I'm going to keep them to myself in case I'm wrong. It's not insider information. I just have hunches, and we'll see what
Are they
happens.
doing Knights versus Knots again for
We haven't heard. We don't know.
Because like they put the graphic out for the spring game date, but like they didn't have any reference to like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll be curious, because they've done something different for the spring game the last few years, and it's always something interesting in the grabs headlines. It was Knights versus Knots last year. It was the QR codes the year before that. It was the Twitter handles on the jerseys the year before that. But I don't think you can top Knights versus Knots, right? I don't know what they could do that.
When they came up with it last year, we were like, it should just be that every year. And
Yeah.
I didn't ever really, it didn't even cross my mind that it wouldn't be. I just kind of thought like that's the new thing. But then I kind of didn't think about the point that they do something different every year. So
they're also, I don't know what kind of equipment stuff goes into that too. I don't know if that was a thing that they could possibly do every year, because I know those jerseys and everything are getting older. So maybe that was just a sort of perfect storm last year. But because remember, it wasn't just that they were breaking out the old space uniforms. It was that we saw for the first time ever, we just saw flat out Citronauts on a helmet. We got the Citronaut decal for the first time ever, and that Citronauts word mark. And even though it was just for a spring game, it looked very freaking cool.
Yeah. I'm glad I stuck to doing the Uniswag thing to start the podcast.
And not what's just happened, since we're recording a lot later at night than we usually do. Yeah. And we've watched UCF lose to #1 Houston.
Yeah. It's every game that this basketball team plays. I'm like, they're going to do something special. And they almost do. And then you're like, oh, and then.
I can't be mad about the last couple games. I mean, they
season.
Almost beat #8 Iowa State, now #6 Iowa State, and they almost beat #1 Houston. And the almost is the problem. But the thing for me about this season is that they were first off, this was the most fun I've had for UCF basketball season since the tournament season. I think that's true for most of the fan base by a lot. And the thing is, they were supposed to be awful this season. And the fact this whole season, they felt like part of the Big 12 in a season where they were supposed to be the doormat of the Big 12. And it's been special. And I think that you look at the situation they're in now, and how they were able to really build a very competitive Big 12 team through the portal. And now they're recruiting at a very high rate. They've got Mikey Williams potentially coming in next year. They've got a couple of blue chippers possibly coming in as well. It's like, I'm kind of seeing a roadmap here for this team to not be terrible in basketball.
Which I never thought
in
that
a
was
billion years.
How many times have they been blown out this year? Like maybe
twice, I
two?
think.
Kansas
times? State and the first Houston game. That's pretty much it.
In the first Houston game, it was 15 points. They had the worst shooting performance in the history of the conference. So yeah, it's been a fun year. And the other thing that did just happen before that game ended was UCF baseball beat #4 Florida. That's their fifth straight win over Florida. They just own Florida.
They literally
And
own Florida in
it
baseball.
is incredible. So yeah, that's awesome. But
Do you ever think
ready to
about how
get
just
oh,
before let me just further delay our actual
okay.
podcast. I mean, you look at these last few years and it's like, it feels like UCF has beat Florida in literally every sport, right? I mean, just the last 2, 3 years, it's been what? It's been men's basketball, women's basketball, baseball, and football. Am I missing any?
Did they beat them in softball once or no?
I think they beat him in softball at some point there
That's
too.
not women's soccer has beaten them.
UCF owns Florida. And it's actually funny. Like, I'm not even saying this trash talk. UCF just flat out owns Florida. They beat them in every sport every time they play. That's been the reality for
That's
like
a
3 years
great point.
now. Yeah.
That is a great point because yeah, I mean, you kind of forget because they all happen in different years, but like men's basketball beat them in the NIT last year. A few years ago was in the tournament, right? It was when
Women's basketball beat them
UCF
in the
beat women's or
tournament.
women's basketball. Yeah,
Baseball beats them
it's
every time either of them field a team. Football beat them in the Gasparilla Bowl. Like you said, I know that softball, they have lost them in softball
yeah,
at some point recently, but still, it's like, I know it's not a rivalry, but like when you look at all sports, including football, it's not even like, oh, it's back and forth. It's like, now UCF just wins almost all those games going back
yeah, and
years.
then October 5th, maybe it'll happen again in football. So let's talk about football.
Let's do it.
This
That's
is the
what you
first
all
time
are
I
here
feel
for.
like you and I have talked about football on most of our podcasts forever. But like there are times in the off season where it's like we're just grasping at straws to figure out like what football things we talk about. This time, it feels right to talk about football for once. For once in the spring, I mean, because spring football starts next week. Practices start on Monday, the 11th, and so we'll talk about it. We're going to talk about some of the biggest questions we have going into spring ball. We have 5 of them here that we're just going to kind of work through. And of course, this wouldn't be a Pegasus podcast conversation about UCF football without starting with the linebacker position. The first question we're talking about here is how does the linebacker depth chart begin to take shape? Not that we'll really know. I mean, we don't ever get any access to spring ball other than some of the insider practice reports we can see, but then comes the spring game. But I don't know. I mean, when you look at it right now, I mean, it's a whole room of transfers and then some young guys. I'm assuming Ethan Barr and Exree Alexander are probably the 2 starters they end up with, but it's that time of the year where I say something like that, and then we'll fast forward, 6 months, and neither of those guys will even be dressing or on the 2 deep. So I don't
Yeah.
know.
I mean, listen, we have done what? I think we've done, this is going to be this is our fourth off season of this podcast, 21, 22, 20. Yeah, this is our fourth off season. We've
Yeah.
learned a valuable lesson, and that lesson is that before spring ball, you know nothing. We currently know nothing. If anyone is out there telling you they know things, they're lying to you. They know nothing. It's just because you know who doesn't even know the coaches. I just,
Yeah.
that's seriously, of all the lessons we've learned in podcasting and how maybe I shouldn't be making declarative statements until like September. One of the biggest things has been that pre-spring ball, it's really a guessing game. So we can do the best we can. But
You
what you
know,
just said is what I'm imagining, right? I feel like it's
yeah.
Ethan Barr and Exree Alexander because those were far and away their top 2 targets. Ethan Barr in particular.
You know what the coaches are doing right now? They're not knowing either. They're hoping. They're
Yep.
hoping the
Yep.
guys they brought in through the portal are going to make up a roster that is capable of making noise in the Big 12. And I guess based on his comments and actions, Gus thought they had done it last year. I don't think anyone else really thought that. But Gus sure did.
So my Gus
Um,
pet peeve at this point, I think my biggest one, I should say, since I've had a
I
few,
have a few.
he part of his media strategy is just as long as he's been here every single season, he always is basically just saying we're going to go win everything. And I think seriously, I mean his opening press conference when he was announced as head coach of a group of 5 team, he declared they were literally going to win the national championship eventually. And every single season he's come in and said privately to boosters and publicly, oh man, we've got a great team this year and I think we're going to win all our games or something along those lines. And we're getting it again this offseason, and I believe it more than I did last year, but I'm also just kind of immune to it at this point. It's just kind of boy who cried wolf. And I hope that's more just his media strategy versus Gus is actually thinking about these teams are that good.
Yeah.
I really hope,
I
but
I'm leaning toward that being the case. I
I
think
think
that's
so.
just what he's gonna say forever until the end of time. Like
And I
that's
want to be clear,
just
not all coaches do that. Some coaches
no.
are, and there are different strategies. And some coaches, it's not even an honesty thing. Some coaches just want to buy themselves some leeway by going out there and
Yeah.
saying, I don't know, and also it can be a fundraising opportunity. There are a lot of coaches who will go when they get a mic in front of them and talk about how, oh, we don't have money or, oh, our rival has all this to try to drum up their own boosters. Gus's strategy and angle is always along the lines of things have never been better than they are right now. And UCF might not lose a game until the 2040s. And, it's a strategy, but yeah,
Yeah.
they don't know. The coaches don't know. We don't know, but The thing that struck me most about linebacker, to bring us back, just looking at the players they have this year, is they I can't congratulate them on this until the season has actually happened, but
I know where you're going with this.
after years of us talking about how linebacker is so thin and oh my God, what are they going to do? They built like a whole freaking linebacker room in one offseason.
Yeah.
And we have layers of depth here, and we don't know what they have until they get out there. But a lot of I'm surprised, and I was surprised at the time, and I still am now, that they got this many potentially starting caliber players to commit to the same school. You don't often see that. I don't really know how they pull it off, but like, based on what we know now, well done.
Yeah. I mean, because you look at it, and I just said like my projected starting two here on March 6th is X-Ray Alexander and Ethan Barr. But then you got Josiah Pierre, you've got Xavier Carter, who came in from UNLV, that we don't know too much about. And then you have your own guys that, like, Cam Moore is now going into his third year. He even played as a freshman and was like, serviceable.
Yeah.
They've got Troy Ford. They've got, Andrew Harris, who's going to be coming in to another year. So there's all those guys.
True freshman, obviously, but he was shining in the All-America practices. I mean, I don't know. There's a lot going on here, which is not something we've ever been able to say about this room.
Which it was just, the horrible thing is, like, I don't know. It is one of those things where I will believe it when I see it, because I feel good about it. I'm like, wow, there's a lot of potential guys here. It's like they have enough here, it looks like, on paper to put something together to where we're feeling better about the position than we did last year. Again, we could get 6 months down the line and play a few games, and we'll just look at them and be like, are you? I don't know. It could be one of those things. It could just still not have anything, but it looks like they do. So we'll be hopeful for now.
Look, I'm just going to say it. I'll say it, and I'll regret it in a few months. Ethan Barr, X-Ray Alexander, Josiah Pierre, Andrew Harris, Troy Ford, Xavier Carter, Quay Birdsong. There is no way there are not two starting caliber linebackers in that group. There's just no way. There might not be three. Maybe it'll still be in room, but there's no way there aren't two. I can't get myself to believe that. I just don't buy it. Specifically, I think the group of Ethan Barr, X-Ray Alexander, and Josiah Pierre are all guys who are proven enough and have shown enough at their previous stops that it would be considered a pretty big surprise if they were just flat out duds.
I would like to agree, so I will. Yeah, I think that's hopefully something that we won't have to worry about. But again, only time will tell. Let's see where we'll go next year. We'll go to stay on defense. What will the starting secondary look like? Again, this is another thing where you look at the corners, you look at the safeties they have. I feel like they have, between the two position groups, I don't know, like 8 guys who could start, 9 guys. Like, it's crazy the kind of depth it looks like they have, as far as, like, it's one of those things, again, like linebacker, where you throw enough of them at the wall where you're like, some of them are going to stick. Like, some of these guys are going to be good starting quality players, because there are a lot here. Do you want to start at corner?
I'm just laughing at what you're saying, because my first note for secondary is, quote, I can name 9 to 10 guys who I feel like are starters.
It feels like that. And then there's a lot of guys have started already, like have started games. Brandon Adams, who's somebody that Javon Baker, I asked him which UCF players would be at the NFL Combine next year. He named Brandon Adams as one of them. So Brandon Adams, who started games for, I think, like 3 or 4. This might be his 4th year starting. No, 2021. Yeah. He started games in 2021.
This will be year 4.
So yeah, he started games. Braden Marshall got valuable playing time as a freshman. Antoine Jackson's a guy coming in, has started games at ECU. Jarvis Ware's played a ton. Yeah, there's a lot here.
That's a strong group right there.
Then you've got a lot of guys here. And
can I just say that wasn't strong podcasting? My comment was, that's a strong group of guys there. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that comment, but it is, honestly, and it's so funny kind of what we're looking at going into this offseason, because this is our first forward-looking 2024 season podcast, because it's just that time. Yes. Spring ball's here. That's we're in that time. And we're what, 10 minutes into this conversation, not even. And I'm realizing, oh no, I'm hyped. Like, just looking at the team, because our first 2 questions so far, we've answered with, oh wow, they have a lot of guys there who I think could be good. And that's not good, because the Big 12 is a crazy conference, and they could be an insane team and go 7-5. So I'm going to try to rein in a little bit, but just even like, I'm just feeling really good about everything, which is not good.
I feel like I'm in the same boat, but what I need to happen out of spring ball is I need them to do the thing where after spring ball, like, they go out and sign a few more transfers, because they're like, and give the impression that they're like, oh, we are worried about some things. Because then I'll be like, all right, I'll course correct and be like, maybe we should be worried. And then if they come out and they're really good, then it's like, okay,
And we've learned
I
a
can get my
lot
hopes up.
in the portal era. It's kind of funny. It's you sort of get that insider info based on who they start targeting. I mean, you can just see like they will practice, they will do spring ball, and then the portal window will open for spring. And I'm just using this as an example, but say that you suddenly see like all these defensive ends reporting UCF offers. It's like, okay, we've noticed what the problem is, but
Well, last year, I think going into spring, we thought like again the same thing. We're like, wow, they have a lot of guys who could start at corner. Like we probably
yeah.
are pretty set there. And then they go out and they get DeCorian Patterson like 2 weeks into spring, and he was like a starting. He led the nation in interception. So we're like, oh, that's just a guy who's. And I think we ended up being wrong. I thought he was gonna come in and be their number one corner.
He was
right
a
away,
solid
but
rotational guy, but that was pretty much where he capped out.
But I remember the feeling at the time where it's like, oh, they feel like they need to go out and get like a starting caliber corner. So maybe they're not as set as we thought they were. But there's so much here at corner, and then safety. I didn't read off the safeties. Like Ladarius Tennyson from Ole Miss, the transfer, I think is very, very much you're one of your starters. Like I think he's one of those guys.
He's kind of I'm curious how they're going to implement him though, because he's sort of a do it all, fly all over the field type guy. Like, is he more of a linebacker? Like, I don't know. Yes, like I think he's potentially the highlight of the transfer class outside of KJ Jefferson, and someone who's like probably the closest thing they've ever had on defense through the portal as like a step in star. But yeah, not saying the star position, just saying stepping in as a star, to be clear. But
we need to go back to just the regular position names.
We don't know. It's a new defensive coordinator. They might have all new names for this crap. But yeah, I'm very excited for him.
I mean, Byron Threats and Deshaun Pace, both guys coming in from Cincinnati. And then there's the guys you already had: Nakai Martinez, Damari Henderson, both played well. Quadric Bullard's been at UCF since I was a freshman.
What I'm laughing at is Quadric Bullard is by no means a bad player. He is a starting caliber player. And on my list, I was just, he's so far down as far as just when you're listing names. I mean,
yeah,
it's crazy.
They've got freshman Jacob Good coming in. Yeah, I mean, they've got so many guys here for this year. And then you look at both of those rooms, and some of those guys that I named are young, whether they're freshmen, sophomores, redshirt sophomores, whatever they are, redshirt freshmen. They've got a lot of youth over there too, so that's also promising, not just for this year, but for the future.
And what's funny
until
is
the
that
portal happens, you can't look in the future in college football. It's stupid. Whatever.
You can't. The college football currently doesn't even have a playoff in any way, shape, or form after the 2025 season, so you just can't look.
It's a season by season thing. You kind of have to. It's like college basketball has been for a while, I guess, hasn't it? It's like every team looks different.
Yeah, but you know what sucks is that, and not to get profound, and I'm not even going to go there, but college basketball's regular season has never been less popular than in the one and done era, and I hope that we're not moving into that in football. And I'm gonna say it, I feel it a little bit. Not that I'm any less more interested in college football because I'm a diehard, but I'm gonna sound like such a boomer when I say this, and I'm not even saying it like it shouldn't be this way or whatever, but it's a different relationship to the team when you don't really get to know players over multiple seasons. Like I think about how wild it is that RJ Harvey will have ended up spending like 4 years at UCF and how rare that is when that used to be what everyone did. It's kind of odd.
Yeah. And okay, we don't have to get into it. I was going to
I took us so off the rails with that comment.
No, I was going to make a comment that I was going to take us way further off the rails, but it was something you were talking about with the playoff and all that stuff.
I'm going to warn everyone listening to this podcast right now. And we said it earlier, so it's not a secret or anything, but it's 10 p.m. while we're recording this.
It's a late night pod.
Whenever we do the late night pods, we just have weird energy. I don't know why. So I know you're listening to this the same time you always do, but I don't know what it is. I don't know if we're tired or what. Every single time we do a late night podcast, we just start getting off topic. And like this, for example, Bailey says, how about those safeties? And I reply, let's talk about the profound impact of transfers on college football. So I apologize. But one point I want to make really quickly, and it's a specific shout out to really Addison Williams and just the staff as a whole, is when you're looking at even just the safeties in the corner, just the secondary as a whole, as far as guys who we know are contributors and will play and are important, Damari Henderson, Nakai Martinez, Braden Marshall are all young guys brought in from high school by this staff. That's a crazy hit rate to already have 3 guys like that just through a few classes who we are so excited to see out there this year.
Yeah, no, that's actually, when you put it that way, it's crazy. I do feel good about this group as a whole, and hopefully that sticks around. But it's like what we just said with linebackers. Like there are enough guys here where you're going to have a solid starting secondary. Like I can't look at this group and believe like, oh, they're going to fall short in this area. They're going to fall like maybe. And it looks like for now, it looks like there's depth too. Like the kind of depth that Gus said, like, oh, we need to build out Big 12 caliber depth. And like they started to do that. And it is like the same thing with, like you mentioned with the linebackers about bringing in 3 starting caliber linebackers. They did it with safety, like Ladarius Tennyson. However, they deploy him. Byron Threats, and I guess Deshaun Pace was kind of like that too, wasn't he? Where he's kind of a, they plug him in different places, but all three of those guys committed in the transfer class, and then there's Antoine Jackson from ECU who also committed. So it's like they were able to go out and bring in these guys who have played before. That's another thing that you and I talked about like a couple weeks ago when the transfer class started being put together. Is like they've been going after guys who have played a lot of football and like actually played at their previous schools.
They've learned their lessons from let's go get the former 5-star who hasn't seen the field in 2 years. They've learned that doesn't work. And what's funny is you talk about Big 12 depth and how that was so much of the issue last year just across the team is that they'd tried to build quickly through the portal, which I can't go back now and say that was a mistake because I was fully on board with that strategy as they were doing it the last couple of years. So I can't say now it was wrong or it didn't work or whatever, even though it kind of backfired a little bit because they just didn't have that depth. Just looking at the defense, every single position other than like, I think pretty much defensive end, it feels like they have legitimate Big 12 depth. Every single position I see where you can lose 2 guys to injury, 2+ guys to injury, and there are guys behind them who can step up. And again, then they will go through spring ball and we'll realize all these guys suck and we'll change our opinions. But as of right now, it feels like they've built that depth, especially on defense, which is crazy.
It's crazy to think about. I mean, especially with the state, we don't need to go back to the linebacker room, but how many, like, for years now, it's been,
my God,
what are they going to do at linebacker? And for the first time, at least as of now, I feel like they've done enough to build that room at least a little bit. And that just feels nice to say, even if it doesn't last, it feels nice to believe it for now, because that's what we're going to do for the next 5 months is believe. So that's cool. Let's go to the offense. Who will emerge as UCF's wide receiver 3? This one I'm less, like, I don't know, less excited about this group.
Yeah, my hot take is it's going to be someone who's not on the roster. They have to go get a wide receiver 3, man. So if for those of you who don't obsessively know everyone at every position, the wide receiver room is Kobe Hudson, superstar. Can I call him a superstar?
I think so.
I'm going to call him a superstar. Kobe Hudson, UCF superstar. Self-proclaimed Javon Baker hype man who declared on Twitter this week that Javon Baker is the best wide receiver in UCF history, and it's not close, is what Kobe Hudson said. And UCF fans took that exactly as well as you'd expect. They've got Kobe Hudson leading that unit. They've got Xavier Townsend, who I think is really solid, and I think was overshadowed a little bit last year just because of how good Javon and Kobe were. There's nothing behind them. Not nothing is in nothing, but nothing proven. I mean, you've got like Trent Whittemore, who I don't know. He was not good last year and he's old. So I don't know what leap you're expecting him to take. And then, I'm sorry, he is. Is that?
I mean, it's just funny.
He's old and irrelevant for college football. I don't mean like he's applying for Social Security.
I pictured him as like an aging veteran in the NFL. Like,
I know Trent Whittemore doesn't have a Medicare card. I'm just saying that he's been in college football for a while, and there aren't really guys who play 3-4 seasons of college football and then year 4 or 5 they're suddenly great. They brought in Goldie Lawrence from FSU, who was a true freshman last year and didn't play for them. That's someone they really wanted out of high school and they didn't get, so it was nice to get him back. But again, a true freshman who didn't play at ACC school doesn't strike me as someone who's coming in to fill that spot. I have 2 takes for you. You ready? Take one I've already said. So I don't know why I said I have 2 when I've already said the first one. Bradell Richardson. I'm buying the hype, guys. I think that he, as a true freshman, I took him in my transfer draft.
I would say you drafted him, didn't you? Yeah.
So this works in my favor. I think Bradell Richardson might finally be that type of guy who can have and I don't even know if it's enough, but at least have like a 2017 Gabe Davis, 2022 Xavier Townsend type season where he can be a contributor right away. And honestly, given the way the room's shaping up, he might just by default play a big role. Either that or they're going to get a transfer. Those are my 2 takes.
Yeah. Going back to your initial, can we call Kobe Hudson a superstar? I mean, 900 yards last year, 8 touchdowns, 20.5 yards per catch. Like, that seems like if Javon wasn't on the team, like, he would have been their superstar receiver last year. It was just the fact that UCF more had a 2-headed monster last year because Javon had 1,100 yards, 21.9 yards per catch, and 7 touchdowns. So, yeah, hopefully Kobe.
Can I ask a question about football?
Yeah.
Just in general, can you be a really good team with only 2 good wide receivers? Like, if they just can't figure out wide receiver 3, can they still have a good season?
Define good season.
13-0 playoff berth. I don't know. Can they win the Big 12 if they can't find a 3rd wide receiver?
Do they have a good tight end?
It's not hypothetical, Bailey. It's this team.
Well, I know that's what I'm saying, but like if they get like if they make up for it, or like if their wide receiver 3 has like very, very modest production, but their like tight end is really productive, then maybe. Sure.
I mean,
like,
they have a rising star pass catching tight end in Randy Pittman, so I do think he can fill that hole to some extent.
Now I'm trying to think. Let me go back to 2017. Let's put this to the test. Who are the receivers in 2017?
Can I do it off
Traquan.
the top of my head, or you're just going to say
Yeah.
them? Okay. Traquan
Well,
Smith was number one. Dredrick Snelson.
mhm.
Ooh, who was third that year? I bet Jordan Akins was third in receiving yards, to be honest with you. Was
Yeah.
he? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
And then it
interesting.
was Gabe Davis. So I'll go to the numbers just because you asked this question. Traquan Smith was 11, almost 1,200 yards, 13 touchdowns. Then there was Snelson, who was all the way down to 695 yards and 8 touchdowns. So even that for a wide receiver two isn't like what they got from Kobe last year. Jordan Akins had 515 yards and 4 touchdowns. And then Gabe Davis was number 4 at 391 yards and 4 touchdowns. So if they can get what is so
I'm
funny?
just, you mean to tell me that the last time they only had two truly good wide receivers, then a young guy and a pass catching tight end, they went 13-0 and it was the best season in program history.
Oh man. And
Now
then
they had
Marlon
Mackenzie
Williams.
Milton and that helped, but
I mean, it was also the fact that they had, and they have really good running backs now. So like they had Otis Anderson, who was like a running back wide receiver, who he was right after Gabe Davis with 351 yards. So and he had
But I will say it is comforting that the best team in program history, and not only the best team, but I think what many fans remember is the best offense in program history, really only had two fully developed starting level wide receivers. I think that's fair to say. So that's encouraging.
And because so much of it, you look at McKenzie's numbers, and it was just crazy.
Well,
like looking at
but
this
again,
now,
McKenzie could also cover for some things because of how mobile he was, and KJ Jefferson is also mobile.
Right.
He's more mobile like a tank than a Lamborghini, but still.
I'm looking at the rushing, and I'm like, oh, they had a lot of rushing. Adrian Kilms was their leading rusher at 790 yards. Otis wasn't even second. It was Mackenzie Milton.
Well, Otis was a true freshman that year, to be fair.
Yeah, but Milton had 613 rushing yards.
Milton had 600 rushing yards that year.
Apparently.
God, he dropped. I don't think he had nearly that many in 2018. Those teams were fun,
touchdowns.
Man.
Very good. He had 45 total touchdowns that year, by the way.
That might have, for the record, been the dumbest thing I've ever said on this podcast, was just going, yeah, that 2017 team was fun. Like, that was a take that
winning was really fun.
Before. Yeah, I remember when they never lost a game and they scored over 30 points in every single game. That was a kind of fun era.
Let's go further. Well, it's not even really further out the rails. We're still talking about receivers because I just went to 2018, and it's a similar thing where Gabe Davis was their number 1. He had 815 yards. Snelson was number 2 at 688.
They had Trey Nixon in 2018.
Trey Nixon was number 3, and he was at 562 yards and 4 touchdowns.
They had Marlon. They had Marlon too. That was actually a really strong wide receiver room.
Marlon that year only had 234 yards and a touchdown.
Really?
Yeah.
God, and then the next year after that, or I guess 2 years after that, he was. I mean, yeah, they had that. That's a strong room. I wouldn't compare that to this room, but it is a good point. Just looking at this team, that I'm not as worried. I've literally just through this conversation made myself less worried of that. If they don't ever find that wide receiver 3, just given that they have a player as talented as Kobe Hudson and they have a quarterback as talented as KJ. They have that pass catching tight end and Randy Pittman. I mean, the offense is. They also have RJ freaking Harvey at running back. Maybe it's not a disaster. It'd still be preferable if they. Yeah. And honestly, it's there's so much hype around UCF right now, and the offense in particular. It just feels like, I know the spring portal is never nearly as strong as the fall portal, and it's often a lot of guys who are in there not because they're looking for a new home, but just because they're not going to be getting the playing time where they want to be. But you have to think that UCF is a very ideal destination for a lot of the top wide receivers who are going to be in the portal this spring, just because that need is so obvious and because of how high powered the offense is looking.
Have you noticed for like the last week or a week and a half, like KJ is getting a ton of pub? Like,
is pub a thing we're saying now?
Is it not a thing?
I don't know. Is that a thing? You mean publicity? We're saying pub now?
Yeah, like I thought that's what a lot of people say. Yes, you're very old, because a lot of people say that.
I'm not shaming you. I've just never heard you say that.
I feel like older people say that. I don't know. I felt old when I said it, so that's why I was confused of getting.
Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of KJ pub. What's stupid about my brain is you said pub and my brain completed it to sub. I was just pub sub was immediately where my brain went. But yeah,
I thought you were gonna say something about I thought you were gonna make a comment about pub at UCF, like it closed, didn't it?
Yeah, pub's gone. I
didn't even really know.
You just made some of our listeners very sad by reminding them the pub is gone, but it's fine.
I'm sure they'll get over it. But yeah, have you noticed?
I have noticed that.
I think UCF tweeted something about it, and then that day, because I remember them kind of pointing it out that ESPN had written some kind of feature on KJ, and it came out like a push notification where it was like KJ Jefferson, great, and it was the same day that UCF I think had posted a clip about him or something like that. So,
yeah, I mean, but the truth is that KJ is the most high-profile wide receiver. Wide receiver. Damn it!
Oh no, sorry. You're so used to wide receivers.
I was literally about to say it's because literally right before this podcast started, we were also making jokes about JRP being a wide receiver, and I apologize, but He's the most high profile quarterback they've had since Dylan Gabriel. It was a low bar in the interim. I understand that, but he's not someone who's perceived as a superstar on the national level, but he is someone who everyone considers to be a good to great option and someone who's been a name in college football for a while. So yeah, they're getting some hype off of that.
You think he's higher profile than Dylan Gabriel?
Absolutely not.
Oh,
Now, higher profile than Dylan Gabriel at UCF, you mean? Because obviously Dylan Gabriel now is like a superstar. I don't think so. Dylan Gabriel was a big deal when he was at UCF.
Yeah. Okay, we talked about wide receivers. Let's go on to something. We did a whole podcast on this last year. Which players are on transfer watch? We just speculated wildly last year. We're like, these players might transfer. I don't know what our hit rate was, but yeah, the one that I don't know, it's like almost like we're willing him to transfer. We've talked for, I think, maybe a year and a half now about Johnny Richardson transferring, and he just never has. And so, I don't know, maybe he's on transfer watch. Maybe he just wants to finish his career at UCF. Maybe he's just happy at UCF and doesn't feel like going anywhere else.
I was pretty certain he was going to not certain based on even, I'm phrasing that wrong because that sounds like there weren't rumblings that he was transferring. It was just one of those things that and I think a lot of people assumed was coming when the season ended just because of how he had been utilized. And this offseason, they go and add Miles Montgomery. DeMarcus Bowman is still hovering out there. We don't really know what the deal with him was this past year. And they bring in 2 true freshmen in Stacey Gage and Frankie Arthur. I mean, Johnny, is this his last year of eligibility? It has to be, or close to it.
It has to be.
So
I think so.
I don't know why you would spend that on a team where there's a very real chance that you might just not see the field. Because we've seen time and time again that Gus Malzahn's offense is not an offense that goes super deep into the running back room. And I, at this point in time, would probably expect Montgomery to take that RB2 spot away from him. We don't know until we get out there in spring ball, but he was pretty good at Cincy. And I just, if you're Johnny, maybe you're just happier. You know, maybe you're just, I like UCF. I know I'll get on the field to some extent, whatever, but he's good, right? I mean, he's not really good enough for UCF, but he's good enough that he could drop down a bit to maybe a G5 or even a different P5 and play a lot, maybe be an RB1.
I was just thinking he'd be electric on like as a different team's like RB1. He would be a really fun running back. And the thing is, like, I feel like it's even harsh to say like he's not good enough for UCF. Like for his role, he's done his role well at UCF. He's just was never going to be UCF's RB1, and now he might get bumped down by Miles Montgomery. And then I think there's probably got to be some sort of, not that it's going to be like a high priority, but there's got to be some sort of like concerted effort to say like, hey, we've got these high profile freshman running backs in that like we probably need to give them a little bit, like something we don't want them transferring out within a year. Like
I don't know if they'll do that. I mean, sure, the first 2 games of the season, I'm sure we'll see them a bit, but it's not like, I mean, the thing about Johnny, and to play devil's advocate a little bit, we had this exact conversation last year about how DeMarcus Bowman's coming in to take that RB2 slot and Johnny's going to fall away. And it didn't happen. He hung on. So he's beaten the odds once. And honestly, maybe if you are Johnny, the reason he hasn't transferred yet is you might as well go through spring ball and see where things shake out. Maybe you think you can beat out Bowman again. Maybe you think you can beat out Montgomery too. And if by the end of spring ball it's become clear he's not on that level, maybe that's when he pulls the trigger.
Yeah, maybe that's why I think he's on transfer watch. Is like
he absolutely is.
A lot of it will depend on how the spring goes. But he's one. I mean, I'm trying to think of like who else.
There's one other big one.
Oh, Timmy McClain is
Timmy McClain's the other big one to me. He's such the obvious one that I think 2 podcasts ago I forgot he's still on the team, and I talked for several minutes about
I think you had already convinced yourself that he had already transferred. He'd announced his transfer.
So his dad has literally tweeted stuff on Twitter about how he needs to transfer, et cetera. So I've just assumed it's coming. I don't know. You look at quarterback. I mean, they have 6 scholarship quarterbacks going into spring ball. That's kind of unheard of for most schools, and I don't know how the heck they're still at 6 after spring's over.
Yeah, and I don't know. Maybe Timmy wants to stay. Maybe he just wants to stay at UCF. He would be the backup, I would think, right?
It's almost certainly. I can't imagine anyone. And honestly, he proves. Some of you might disagree a little bit, but I think he proved to be a worthy backup this past season. I definitely would prefer he stay on the team because KJ is someone who's really awesome. But say that Timmy does transfer out. Say Timmy says, "I'm going to go. I don't know, go to the Conference USA or the AAC or wherever and just be a starter." If KJ, God forbid, does get hurt this season, there's no one there who you feel confident in. UCF season's over if they have to trot out Dylan Risk already. EJ Colson's not going to be ready to see the field. Period. I don't. Xavier Williams is a body. I
almost wonder if Xavier Williams is on transfer watch too, just because we haven't heard anything about him in a year and a half.
I would put him less on transfer watch and more on UCF showing him the door watch is probably where that one's at. I know those are interchangeable terms. And again, it's all right, we're going to do it since spring ball's coming up. Hello, everyone who's listening to this podcast. This is your annual reminder that when a UCF player enters the portal and says and tweets, "I have entered the portal," and you tweet mean things at them, remember that most of the time that player has been told to leave. That most of the time, that is why they're leaving, unless they're a star.
They want their scholarships. And I mean, with the quarterback position, like you just mentioned, having that many quarterbacks on scholarship, like someone's got to go, really. Like they're gonna want someone to leave, and maybe
I'd be curious. I should
leave.
have figured out how many total scholarships they're at right now, because you can go into a season with 85, and where I mean, I don't know how close they are to that, but if they're going to want to add guys after spring, those scholarships might have to come from somewhere if they're at that limit or close to it. And when you have 6 quarterbacks, when you have 6 scholarships at a position where one guy plays at a time, that's an easy place to come up with some scholarships. But yeah, I really hope Timmy stays. I just think if you are Timmy McClain right now and you look at his personal journey, he was at USF. They brought in a transfer to start over him, who I think everyone pretty much agreed should not have started over him. He leaves. That ended up being viewed as kind of a premature decision because Bohannon was hurt quickly after that, and Timmy probably would have ended up the starter at USF if he'd stayed. He's now at UCF and just watched himself get recruited over like 5 times within 2 years of being at UCF. And if you're him, do you just ride it out and say, listen, I'm cemented at QB2, and I know that there's a decent chance that I might play this year if KJ gets hurt? Or do you say, I've only got a couple years eligibility left here. Free transfers are a thing now. I want to be the guy. I want to go try somewhere else where I can make that happen. I don't know.
Which I could see in either way. Like I think either way is probably a decent decision for him. Like it just depends on what he prioritizes and what he values. It is weird to think about though, like him leaving USF. Like he would have started very quickly, and then I do wonder how long he would have held on to that job because they have Byron Brown. He's very good. So
yeah, but remember, Byron Brown was what, like 3rd or 4th string the year that he popped off. I mean, he maybe never gets that opportunity. The thing about quarterbacks that fans forget a lot, I think media forget a lot too, is that it's a position where you just don't know. You never ever know until they're out there. My favorite example of this was from last year when Max Duggan at TCU was a Heisman finalist and he didn't win the job. That year, he did not win the job that year, and then TCU starter is hurt at the beginning of the season. He steps in and he's a Heisman finalist. It's quarterback. There's so much of a mental component, and it's just something that is so hard to analyze in practice. I think enough time has passed, and this is out there enough to say that Milton was notorious for not being good in practice. Like deep into 2017 and 2018, Milton never practiced well because some players just don't really turn it on until they're in a game situation. And so you just don't know. So I don't know. This is all a very long-winded way to say that, yeah, Byron Brown was only discovered because he had to be. And, who knows for Timmy.
There's different ways to look at it. Cause that is true. But I'm sure there's a school of thought. I don't really know which one I fall into, but there is a school of thought probably that he would have emerged eventually. Like,
I don't agree with that. I don't.
A guy that's talented, like he clearly has talent. So like, and
I don't think it works that way. I think there have been quarterbacks who, if in a different situation, they might have been like a 40 touchdowns in a season player who we never ever heard of or saw just because of the circumstance.
But I think he was more of 4th string that year because he was a freshman. Like he was brand new, and that's just where he fit into the.
I know, but say that Timmy doesn't. I like how this is now a USF podcast, but say Timmy doesn't transfer and he never gets the opportunity, then he probably, it's not like an age thing. He might transfer out of USF after that year or the next year. Then he reset somewhere else. Maybe you just never see him. I mean, freaking look at this at every level. The San Francisco 49ers just went to the Super Bowl with a freaking quarterback that no one ever expected to start an NFL game. The 49ers never expected him to start an NFL game.
Former UCF visitor.
Former UCF visitor.
Brock Purdy.
Yeah, so quarterback's a crapshoot, man. And that's why I'm also trying to stress caution with people who are declaring EJ Colson UCF's long-term savior. I just think that, he might be really good. He might not. Maybe Riley Trujillo is randomly that player instead. It's quarterback's tough.
Tommy Castellanos proclaimed himself as the savior. And then
good point though to bring that up, because we did a whole podcast last offseason on who's on transfer watch. Never brought up Tommy Castellanos.
Then we had to do an emergency podcast. We had to do an emergency podcast like a week later, being like, Tommy's leaving.
Yeah.
It always could be somebody that's completely.
Let's play a game right now. And this is never going to come back to mean anything, but we'll just do it for fun. You have to pick one player who's like a surprise transfer, someone no one would ever talk about in this category, who hops in the portal after spring. Who are you picking and why?
I got to look at my list here. It's really difficult to do. Like, does it have to be like an important player?
Just a surprise. It does sound harsh. Like, can I pick someone who's not playing? Just someone who you never would have, not on anyone's radar as a transfer player. Like a Tommy Castellanos type surprise. That's a really random one. I feel like he kind of is on the list though, isn't he?
I don't know. Is he?
I mean, they're going to have a three-way battle for center, and they're not going to know after spring how that shakes out. But if Caden Kittler, I don't know. I'm not saying I'm breaking this,
Xavier
but
Townsend.
Listen, if you're, I like that one. I think that's mine too. Interesting.
Demarcus Bowman maybe? I don't know if that really
No one
counts,
would
but
care. I think it's Townsend. I think it's
no one
Townsend.
would care.
That sounded so harsh. I apologize.
Yeah.
I think the general fan base wouldn't be affected by that one, is how I meant to phrase that.
Xavier would be, I think, a disastrous one.
I could see it. I could
I
see it.
could, but I don't really know why. It's just one of those. It's like
There
if
were
we're
some
talking
like
surprises.
there were some like I'm not even going to call it real intel because it didn't escalate to that point, but there were some social media rumblings about stuff of that topic during fall, about whether
I do
Townsend
kind
was
of
happy with his role and
vaguely
everything.
remember that.
So I don't know. I'm not expecting that because also I don't know why if you're wide receiver two on a two team or a two wide receiver deep team, I don't know why you transfer out of that, but yeah,
Yeah.
that's an interesting one. We'll bookmark this for just in case after spring ball.
Yeah, I don't know. I that was probably the one if I have to do that game. I thought what you were gonna ask me was if you were to pick or if I were to pick, like it's either like Timmy. I forgot we had to do that for a while. Timmy, and it sounded wrong when I said it, and I was like, why did that sound wrong? Timmy McLean and or Johnny Richardson or the field. Like if you pick one to transfer, like would you take one of those two? Like you get either one of those two, or would you take the field of anyone else? I guess the obvious thing we do is take the field because
Yeah. History
there's so
tells me
many
the
of
field
them.
because it just never works out the way anyone's
Yeah.
expecting it to. History tells me the field.
Yeah. So we'll see. Last question we're gonna get into here, and this is one of those that like we've talked about these changes a lot, and I don't know how we'll actually see these like tangibly, but how will the coaching staff changes begin to gel and kind of begin to play out? Because I mean, as much as people might want to say it's not like a new look staff, it is a new look staff, and they're in different roles, different positions, and Gus is back to calling plays again. They've got a new
Yep.
defensive coordinator. Um, they've got a new offensive coordinator technically, and the offensive coordinator from last year is now a co-offensive coordinator, but also the quarterback's coach more so.
Linebackers and wide receivers
Yeah,
both have a new positions coach. There's a new
new
strength
strength coach.
coach,
Like
which I know they've
there
already
have been a
been
lot of
dealing with,
changes.
but yeah, there's been a ton. And that's the thing is you can, if your team semantics of, oh, it wasn't a big change, whatever, that's going to take up a big chunk of spring ball is just getting used to. I mean, whenever you got a pretty significant portion of the team that's getting, I mean, the defense, we don't even know how different the defense is going to be. It's an entirely new defensive coordinator. I mean, they're going to have to break in a lot of new stuff, multiple important positions, dealing with new positions, coaches. I do think that offense, it's probably a little bit less of an adjustment given that Gus
Yeah.
had taken over play calling by the end of last season. And he also called plays before that. That's not necessarily something brand new. So, but defense in particular, there's going to be a lot of adjustment there. And everyone knows how I feel about the coaching changes. And there's nothing that's happened that's changed my stance on that. And I'm not going to get in the camp of saying that this is another negative downside as you have to take, time out of spring ball to get to gel there and everything. But it is something to know. This isn't business as usual. There's a lot of new adjustments that have to happen, and that's going to take up time.
Yeah, and glad you brought up the defense thing because that could have been its own question was how the defense as it's constructed right now will fit in with what Ted Roof wants to do and vice versa, how Ted Roof
Yeah.
is going to use this defense because a lot of these players were recruited. Actually all of these players were recruited and added through the portal through whatever because before they had hired Ted Roof. So
And to be fair, we don't know how open or not open UCF was with them. Maybe UCF was maybe Addison, when he was recruiting these guys, was letting them know, by the way, not going to be your coordinator. We don't know. But the
yeah,
timing was a little suspect as soon as they got all the transfers in, they announced the changes. So,
yeah. So it'll be interesting. Again, it is like one of those things where I'm sure it'll take time, but it's kind of just the logistics of everything where it's like different coaches are going to have different processes. They're going to have
yep.
different ways that like they want to implement certain parts of the scheme or just even the basics, like the day-to-day of how to warm up, in practice and stuff like that. So
I'd also just
I don't
point
know.
out that wide receivers is going to be particularly interesting just because it's a coach, Tim Harris, who hasn't coached wide receivers in a very long time. And B, it's a position, it's one of the positions where there's the most uncertainty. That's going to be interesting.
Yeah. Actually, it is kind of like not funny, but like a weird off season to change your wide receivers coach where
yeah,
like now you're going through a transition and you almost wonder if like part of the reason they let the wide receivers coach go is because that no one behind the scenes had developed to the point where they're going to feel good going into this year about what they have.
And I think that's a fair criticism because it's a little weird on the surface, right? If you don't peel back the onion at all to say that what UCF has a wide receiver named as an all Big 12 first teamer, then they fire the wide receiver coach, which again, we don't know if he was fired or not. It was one of those, they parted ways, but like he was fired. And I do wonder if part of that was how just no one was developing there. But hey, doesn't this feed your Townsend prediction a little bit? Because what if Townsend just isn't vibing with Tim Harris as his positions coach? I mean, that's it. I mean, different players like different positions coaches.
Yeah.
That's a tale as old as time of a player feeling disillusioned after not connecting with their new coach.
Oh, I don't know. I hope that doesn't happen. I hope I didn't just speak that into existence. Yeah, those are the 5 big questions we have heading into spring ball. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to touch on before we jump into the football news and then get out of here.
Just happy it's finally here next week.
Yeah.
I'm ready. There has been a lot of college football news in the interim, and most of it has made me sad and depressed. And it's just nice to be able to root for, just go back to kind of short-term stuff and be like, let's talk about next season and not, whether or not the SEC and Big Ten are going to go make their own playoff or something crazy.
This is maybe an insight into how my brain works, but spring ball hasn't even started yet, but I'm already into like the mode where I'm like preparing myself for a few weeks from now when spring ball's over. Like that's when the real long wait begins. Like
I know. Because truth be told,
hey, we'll get the NCAA video game in that time this time. So that's what, June or May or June? I think it's June, isn't it?
Maybe which is gonna be so great because it's July. They haven't announced an official date, but everyone knows it's July. Which is actually cool because all these questions that we have for the first time since 2013, we're gonna be able to just go answer them ourselves. I'll buy the game, I'll load it up, we'll figure out who wide receiver 3 is. And I encourage everyone to do the same and then tweet at Gus Malzahn what you found. Do you think this game is going to really change how people enjoy a season? I think it is, right?
I don't. I mean, it didn't before, did it?
Yeah, it did. It was just so long ago. Yeah, because and it's actually interesting. There's been a lot of talk on social media about how Arch Manning decided to not be in the game and because he wants to focus on football, and everyone's making fun of him because it's not like some giant endorsement deal. It's like $600 and a copy of the game. But I sent you this. Someone, I forget who, made a point that it actually is a good point because everyone's going to play that game this summer and they're all going to bench Quinn Ewers and play Arch Manning. And then when that doesn't happen this fall, it's going to be a thing. And I can see now on social media, UCF fans are going, because they will be playing before the actual 2024 UCF football team takes the field. UCF fans will have spent like 2 to 3 months playing infinite numbers of seasons with that roster. And they will definitely be coming in with preconceived notions about which players are going to do what. And I know that I'm not saying anyone's dumb enough to be like, they actually think the video game is going to affect real life, but I do think it's going to make things more jarring when they don't go the way that they've been going in your video game for the 50 seasons you've already played with that UCF.
I mean, I've done that, and it is. I guess it just depends on your level of like how dialed in you are. Because I've thought about it. Actually, now that you say that, I play FIFA a lot, and like my knowledge of like international soccer is not like super extensive. So sometimes I'll like, I don't know, I'll get a transfer in and onto my team, and he'll be really, really good. Or like I'll just like play with him in FIFA. I'm like, he's really good in FIFA. And then like you look at Twitter, you look wherever else, and he's like, oh yeah, he's like not very good in real life. Like sometimes that just kind of happens.
Yeah.
But no, I don't know. I don't know. And I did very much enjoy all of the jokes about Arch Manning's decision to opt out, where it's like Arch Manning realizing that he doesn't actually have to live in the video game console. He's like, his mind is blown by that.
It was funny. It was
good. A lot of, and I saw someone just say, well, this man just earned himself a new hater or something like that. Just like people are not happy with him for that decision. So, yeah. But no, I'm looking forward to that game coming out because
me too.
It will bridge, like once we get to that game coming out in like, what is it, usually mid-July, right? It'll bridge the gap, I think, to the last weekend in August, and we'll feel a little bit better, hopefully.
We really just have to make it to mid-July, and then I'm set until the season starts. I've said it before on this podcast. I think I still play NCAA 14 on a close to daily basis. You can judge me for that. That's fine. I probably deserve it, but I am very ready for the new one.
Yeah, me too. Let's jump into the football news. There's not a lot that I need to get through here, but number one, UCF has a space football.
Yeah.
Apparently at the request of KJ Jefferson.
Thoughts?
I like it. It looks cool.
I don't know if I do.
Is that the one they're going to use? Like, I don't really know.
It's the part I don't like. I don't like that. I don't think. I think that's a very hot take because everyone else.
It's one of those things I don't care. Like, it doesn't really matter to me.
It matters to me. I don't know. I feel like using
Why?
it just does, man. If it's just for the space game,
You
it's
will not
cool,
even
but there's
see it.
no way they ordered balls just for the space game. You do see that. I don't know why. I'm sorry. I just turned into a toddler for a second there. You do see that. Absolutely you do, because they've changed the ball design over recent years. It had the night head, as you can see behind me, on it most recently. I absolutely it's also not just like it's just the Citronaut. Everything about the ball is blue. The
Yeah,
Nike
no, it's
check is
cool.
blue. Okay, but if they're using that when they're the Knights and they're wearing black and gold uniforms, that's weird to me. I don't like that.
I don't think it matters.
I
Like
don't know, man. I don't
I
know.
think it's like a cool accessory thing that like, oh, like this ball is really, it looks really cool.
You're
And
gonna
like I'm
notice
saying,
it
like
this season, and I'm gonna
when
be
you're
there to
watching,
say I
I
told you
don't think
so when you
so.
notice it. Yes, you
Like
are.
I'll see it when they post pictures on social media, but like during a game, I don't ever see what the ball looks like.
That's because it blends in with the uniforms because it's
I
gold.
don't think
This is
that's
gonna be
why.
an electric
The
blue Nike
the
check and the
I don't think that's why
Citronaut
at
and
all.
Vapor Elites in blue too. It's weird if they're
I
using
don't
this when they're playing as the
I
Knights.
don't think that's why I don't normally notice it at all, actually.
I'm telling
Um,
you, I'm right
I don't
about
think
this.
so. I don't. I mean, in your opinion, you could be right, but you can't be right about why I do or don't notice the ball because,
It is a
yeah, I've
very cool
never.
looking football.
It is. It's great.
And I love the Citronaut logo so much. I just, I don't know. We'll see how much I notice it, because I'm going to notice it at least a couple times and it's going to bother me when I do.
Yeah. Last thing on the news is some NFL Combine takeaways. Tyler Grable had a really good testing day. He had a 4.95 40-yard dash, which was the third best among offensive linemen. His 9 foot 9 inch broad jump tied for first among offensive linemen, and a 36.5 inch vertical jump was tied for second. His relative athletic score of 9.83 out of 10 has him 23rd among offensive tackles between 1987 and 2024. So just really an elite like testing day for him, where I almost wonder now, like, I don't know. I never really watched him close enough to know if his tape would have gotten him drafted itself, but I think
He's
if
getting
you
drafted now.
combine some of his tape with that, I think, I've seen teams, and this is interesting, and happens all the time, so I don't know if it's that interesting. But there's been some talk, I guess, about teams moving him inside and not playing
Oh, really?
tackle.
I guess that's pretty standard, right?
It is standard until like, and I was like, well, that's weird though, because he's like, he was always listed at UCF at 6'7", so I was like, you're gonna
Right.
move a 6'7" guy, like I don't know if he's kind of his tackle's body, and then he at the combine, I think he measured at like 6'5", so it's like, all right,
Tracks.
so yeah,
I think my favorite part of Tylen Grable's combine experience was when you interrupted him talking about the space game and the win over Oklahoma
I
State
hated
to let
that.
him know that you were there for the game.
I hated that. You know, I do these things sometimes, and I hate listening back to my voice on recordings. Anyway, it's why I don't listen to our podcast anymore. It's just general stuff like that. But then like there's also sometimes where it's even worse than normal. Like I don't like it normally, but then I do something and I'm like, why did I do that?
Which I have to say, I'm poking fun at you. It's not
No,
something
I know, but
Bailey. If you don't know what we're talking about, Bailey was obviously at the combine, not for the Pegasus podcast, but still got to talk to UCF, all the UCF players, and Tylen Grable. It was about the uniform, right? Was that how you got him
no,
to
I was
talk?
actually, so I asked him his favorite UCF memory, and he started talking
Okay.
about the Oklahoma State game. And he was like, if you just put on the tape, and in my mind, I was like, I don't need to put on the tape. I was there. So I like had to reassure him that I was at the game.
But it
And I
sounds
don't
fine. And the I never would have given it a second thought, but you were mortified of how
I
in
think
this
it's because I said it
video
twice.
you're like, oh, and he said your tone was funny. You were like, oh, I was there. Like
Yeah, I was like,
I
I was
was at
there. I
that
was
game.
there. Yeah, like I don't know why I said it twice. I don't like it listening back, but I was like, I gotta post this clip because it was a good clip.
And you also spoke
Um,
to a UCF legend, Matt Lee.
I did talk, yeah, I did talk to Matt Lee. Talked to Javon Baker again. Uh, yeah, no, it was a good time. And Javon Baker, I think like as far as his testing, like I don't think he didn't do anything like wowed anyone, but I don't think he did anything to like take away from where his stock was. Like I don't think he hurt his stock or really helped it a ton. It's like I think he's
Yeah.
looking at some of the mock drafts, like he's falling in between rounds 3 and 5 right now. Like I've seen him as high as third round, as high and then as low as fifth. I don't know. I would be surprised. I feel like third or fourth round is probably.
You tell me, since you're the NFL guy, but it would be a huge shock if he wasn't drafted, right? Like he has to
Oh,
pretty
I'd
much
be
be a lock at
stunned.
this
No,
point.
I would be
Yeah.
stunned. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I guess the only question mark, well, I guess it doesn't even feel like a question mark, is I don't know what happened to Tremont Morris Brash. I just for a couple of years I'd assumed he was going to be drafted, and I don't even know. I don't even think
I'll
that's going to happen.
I'll wait to give up on that after the Big 12 pro days.
That's a good point. That's a good
Because
point.
because it's weird because he didn't really get any of those invites to those All-Star games, which I've talked about on here as
Yeah.
being a surprise. And obviously wasn't at the combine, but at the pro days, if he does something or like he has kind of a day where it's like it might bring in a scout where it's like, we didn't really look at this guy enough, or I don't know, maybe they are looking at him just tape on tape alone, but
Yeah,
we'll see.
he'd definitely be a end of the draft type of guy. I think it'd be a
Yeah,
surprise to see him
and I think
go
I
quicker
don't
than
know.
that.
I would think he could have a shot just based off of production and what he'd done in his career, but maybe he's an undrafted free agent guy. I don't know. It is weird. It kind of one that I've almost forgotten about because I don't know. I started to like think I gaslit myself into thinking he was back this year because I haven't seen him in any like the pre-draft stuff, and I was like, no, wait, that was last year that he came back.
Yeah,
So
it's I
I
will
don't know.
say just I'm feeling very good about Javon and very good about Tylen, and that's great because UCF getting no players drafted was a very embarrassing thing, and I understand it was just partially the portal, partially the way things broke, but ready to see some guys get drafted for UCF.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I'll go back to the last thing I'll say on that was I mentioned it earlier. I asked Javon who from UCF would be at the combine next year. He mentioned Kobe. He mentioned Brandon Adams, KJ Jefferson, who I said, which of your UCF teammates? Like KJ is not even his teammate. He was for a brief second. And then he was like, we got a lot of guys. He's like, we got a lot of guys. So he didn't mention RJ Harvey, but I know he was thinking of RJ Harvey because who wasn't?
Oh yeah.
But I don't know. It's one of those things where the combine isn't the end all be all because only certain what is it? I mean, it's going to sound crazy because now I'm going to say, well, 321 players get invited, but that seems like a lot. But as far as draft eligible players,
Yeah,
there are a lot of them. So
definitely.
we'll see. Game of the week: UCF baseball. I mentioned at the top of the podcast beat number 4 Florida on Wednesday night. They're 9-1. They start conference play this week, which because of how long the conference schedule is in baseball, like it was startling to be like they're already starting conference play 10 games into the season.
I will
But that's
say
just
I'm
how it
not
is.
even like this big college baseball fan. That was very jarring to realize they're here already.
Yeah. So they
I
play
believe
at
this also
Oklahoma.
means that the long national nightmare of them not broadcasting their damn games is over. I think they've said
Think
in their
so.
tweets that they're going to actually like care enough to turn on a camera for the Big 12 games. So that's
Yeah.
exciting for sure.
Yeah, I mean last weekend they broadcast 2 of the 3 games against the USF in that series. Both of the games they broadcasted UCF won. Not saying there's a
Makes you
connection,
think.
but
Makes you think. That's
so yeah,
so cool.
UCF 9-1 at Oklahoma this weekend for their 3-game series to open conference play. Oklahoma 6-5. They play Friday at 7:30, Saturday at 5, and Sunday at 1. Feels like one of those where like I don't know, it's the first conference series, but like you like to bank conference wins as much as you can. Oklahoma's
Absolutely.
not like one of the top Big 12 teams these days. Like last couple of years, they've been more of a middle of the road type team, and Oklahoma is one of the teams on UCF schedule that I would say you would feel like that's a series UCF should be taking 2 out of 3 there. Hopefully, um, if they want to get to where they want to get to,
It's
winning 2
also
out of
just
3
been
there,
such
like
a exciting start to the season. It feels like this is the most hype it's been around the baseball team in a little bit. It would just be very cool for them to continue that right into conference
yeah.
play. Make for a fun
Yeah, because I
time.
mean, when you look at like this landscape of conference, Big 12 conference and baseball, like Oklahoma State's pretty good. They play them next weekend. I think Kansas is actually pretty good this year, but like there's some and Texas Tech's really good always. They avoid TCU, which is huge, but they've got some teams on their schedule this year that are more of like the middle of the road, like bottom tier conference opponents for baseball. So we'll see how things work out. I'm getting excited about it though, because
Yeah.
I don't know. I think softball's starting conference. They might be starting this weekend too, honestly, which is again feels so early because it's March 6th. They
It's
usually
March
start, I
6th,
think,
man.
like
Yeah.
late March. But there are so many games in the Big 12. So exciting times. Tweet of the week.
Tweet of the week. I could do baseball again because they had a tweet that pissed me off, but we're gonna give them a break since I've done it
That
two
would have
weeks
been
in a
three
row.
weeks in a row. So
Someone asked them if they were while they were playing at FAU or why aren't you broadcasting your games, and they replied all like, oh, but there is a broadcast for this game with FAU's freaking broadcast. Like that isn't the most embarrassing thing in the world that the
it was like,
FAU Owls of South Florida can broadcast your freaking baseball game, but if you're playing at home, there's nothing. But
oh, you know what? I was gonna say this just because we're on the topic again. UCF was rightfully getting clowned last weekend for that USF game they didn't broadcast because like USF fans took that and ran with it.
oh yeah,
They're in the Big 12, like they got Big 12 money and they can't broadcast a
strong
baseball game.
point,
It's
strong
great. They
point.
made great points. I wanted to start retweeting them, but I was busy, so I didn't, and I also didn't want to retweet them after all.
Do you know
Um,
how in the wrong you have to be to make me agree with a USF fan? Like,
it's
just think
just
about the depths I've fallen to over this.
it's they wildly overspent somewhere, right? Because it's like the AAC years, they they broadcast every game in the AAC. Like all of a sudden they go into the Big 12 and now they can't afford like to broadcast. What was it? I think they ended up cutting what, 5 games?
Yeah.
For the season, which is like in the grand scheme of things, not a, but it is like when you look at past years where it's like they didn't.
And it's not just baseball. Softball's been stuck in single cam world too. And
they, I don't know if you know this, but is that going to be a thing for the rest of the year, or are they just doing the single cam? Like, I don't know. Is the single cam going to continue into conference play, or is now that conference play starting, they're going to be able to suddenly have multiple cameras? I don't know.
All I can say on that is that if it's not a real broadcast, I'm going to be saying some things, and they're not going to be good, and we'll start a movement. But yeah, I don't care what the excuses. It's unacceptable, and I will be mad about it forever. But anyway, none of this was tweet of the week. The real answer is I don't have one. So that actually worked out. I was out of town all weekend, which is why I was not on social media really at all and missed a lot of stuff, including UCF winning uniform of the year. I was like 6 hours late to that. One of the saddest things that's ever happened to me. I was
surprising.
Seeing friends in North Carolina, made the decision to drive, regretted it. Not the trip, but the drive. So haven't been on social media a ton. But so we're getting a break from Tweet of the Week this week, even though we literally took that space to talk about baseball and trashed them for a third straight week. So at least it's over. At least they're. Could you imagine? What if they come back? What's their first at-home conference series? Do you know who it is? What if Oklahoma State rolls around? They're just like, whoops, surprise. We're not doing this one either.
Let me actually real quick check this because they have a midweek game next week. So is that one being oh, it is. They're broadcasting Stetson next week on Big 12 now, ESPN Plus, same thing.
I think they'd said that they were going to, from here on in, they were going to be broadcast. Now, we'll see what type of broadcast. If it's a single cam setup like softball, that's going to make me angry. But we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
Yeah, we will. We will have to wait and see what happens. But we'll be back next week to talk about baseball broadcasts. Probably not. Hopefully we don't have to talk about it.
We're done. I think the listeners are really over me talking about this.
Like, I don't care really. Honestly, if it continues to be a problem, I don't care if they're done with us talking about it because I'm done with UCF being dumb. So let's just do that. We will be back next week with episode 196. Until then, you can find us on Twitter at Bailey J Adams 22, at by CA Simmons, at Night Sports Now, and at Pegasus Podcast. Thank you guys so much for being with us, and we'll talk to you next week.
Bye, everybody.